Out of Shasta College, how you doing? This is Humanities 4 through Film Studies. Why is it being studied in the humanities? Well, because we're human and all the great things in the world that's ever happened, art, music, films, dance, painting, has been by human hands. So that's why it's in the humanities department. But you also have to pay attention to what's going on in the world out there while the art's being created. I keep telling you what shapes the world the artists are living in, and they make their art and reflects back onto the world. This is no different. This is documentaries. Do you know what a documentary is? Have you ever seen a documentary? Maybe you think you have, maybe you have. Do you watch educational documentaries or rock and roll documentaries or just for fun documentaries or travel documentaries? There's a ton of them out there. I'm going to talk about some people who changed everything in the documentary world. And then I'm going to sign the next essay, which is going to be a documentary called Great Gardens by the Maisel brothers. And so I'll start with the Maisel brothers. Uh, Albert and his brother were from a couple generations ago. They both are passed on now, but they started uh, making documentaries in the 60s. They recorded the Beatles when they were on tour once here. And then later on, they got a big job with the Rolling Stones. You've heard of them, that band that's still going at 80 years old. They were going on tour for the first time in many years in 69 or thereabouts. And they wanted it to be filmed. They trusted the Maisel brothers by what they'd seen them do with the Beatles. And they hired these two. One of them did camera, Albert and his brother did sound. Really small crews. And then they would hire more cameramen to cover more footage because this is a big tour. Stones haven't toured in years and they're going on a tour. They weren't even sure if anybody would show up. And so it starts off as a regular concert film. They're at Madison Square Garden, everything's going great. And then they do a concert, a free concert at the Altamont Speedway. And this is after the Woodstock free concert, and people were wanting to see more of that. And the Stones thought, well, we're going to do a free concert. It's going to be bigger than Woodstock. And so, but if you watch the movie, and the movie is called Gimme Shelter, I hope you do watch it. It's on YouTube. Um, they run into lots of troubles. They're going to do the documentary in Golden Gate Park, but then they didn't have enough permits for that. The city won't allow it. They thought there were going to be too many crazy naked hippies on drugs there. They didn't know what to do, and so they had it at the last minute at a speedway, kind of down by Modesto. Maybe you know it. The Ultimate Pass over there. If you ever go to the East Bay, it's over there. Um, they decided, and they built a stage, and they did this all very quickly, and it's all very haphazard. Wasn't very planned very well at all. And they're hoping they're going to have this peaceful Woodstock type of event. It did not happen, folks. They got some good bands to play with them. They got Jefferson Airplane, Grateful Dead, Flying Burrito Brothers, and it was a disaster. They hired the Hells Angels biker group to be their security, and the bikers beat the holy crap out of the hippies. Uh, Bikers aren't hippies, folks. They're opposite of hippies. They hated the hippies. They hated pacifism. They hated people protesting the Vietnam War. And so they took it out on the hippies by beating them with pool cues. And Jagger and Richard felt threatened by them. They were afraid of their safety. And it escalates. If you watch the movie, they get all this terrifying footage of Altamont. and how volatile it was. Everybody's on some really bad LSD, including the angels, and violence ensues, and a man is murdered. Um, Hunter, Meredith Hunter, there's a Hunter Meredith, I can't forget his, it's one or the other, was 19 years old, black man from the East Bay, and he was stabbed to death by the Hells Angels. Well, did he bring it on himself? A lot people don't know, but he brought a gun to the concert and he aimed it supposedly up at the stage. The angels descended on him with pool cues and knives and killed him. Later on, and that's all in the movie, folks. You barely see it, but it's there. So, Altamont, the concert is considered literally the end of the 60s. We that earlier that summer, we had Woodstock, which was like the embodiment of supposedly the new era of Aquarius. The hippies were going to rule the world. It's going to be a great place. Music and being stoned, free sex. And then Charles Manson had his murder spree. They were supposedly hippies killing the straight people up in the Hollywood Hills. That put a damper on the whole shebang because it looked like Manson's followers were hippies. And the straight world said, see, these hippies are violent. Then there's Altamont a couple months later, which kind of closed the door on the whole hippie generation. The 60s were virtually over within a week or two because now it's went from 69 to 70, but also the violence of Woodstock closed the idealism of a whole culture that had been blooming since the Beatles started played on Ed Sullivan. Maisel brothers filmed that movie. They were in the right place at the right time, or you could say um, the right place at the wrong time, but they got it on film, and it made them stars in the documentary community. They later went on to do other great movies. One of them I'd like you to watch, Grey Gardens. I'll see if I can find it on YouTube for free, or you guys can find it somewhere and tell us where it is. Uh, it's about two eccentric women living in abject poverty. They're both smart, hilarious, and how they survive day to day. And they happen to be cousins of Jacqueline Kennedy, John F. Kennedy's widow. And so they come from wealth and privilege, but they're living in really, really bad situation out on Long Island in the Hamptons, which is a very wealthy community now, but it wasn't then. And the Maisel brothers sat out there for a couple of weeks filming them and they edit. So what their most operandi usually was, they would pick a subject and they would film it, and then they would go take 6, 7 months, a year to edit it to see what the story is. Documentary filmmakers are not supposed to write the stories. They're supposed to let the story unfold. Another great documentary filmmaker does the same thing, Frederick Weissman, who's still alive, by the way, in his 90s, still planning his next film. He takes a subject. Um, it could be anything from high school to a strip club in France, which he did, the Crazy Horse. Um, and he'll film there for 6 or 7 weeks. And then he takes a year to edit. He doesn't use outside music, he doesn't use outside narration. He doesn't tell you the story, he shows it through the visuals that he did during these weeks of filming. I'll go to YouTube and I'll show you some examples of his work. Exciting filmmaker who's getting up there in years. We're not going to see his likes anymore. He calls it action driven, direct action cinema. Um, Other filmmakers who were documentarians, people like Earl Morris, Werner Herzog, Michael Moore. Maybe you've seen his work. He usually has himself as the character in his movies. Maybe you don't like his politics, but he's hugely successful. His movies make a lot of money because they're highly entertaining. His movie Roger and Me, then uh, Fahrenheit 9/11 was a huge hit. He's a funny president, a smart president. The conservative people do not like him. He holds a mirror up to their world, and it's not a pretty world. Now, do they control the story? Do they manipulate the story? Absolutely. Werner Herzog will do several takes. He'll have people interviewing them. He'll say, "Do another take, do another take." Now, you think documentaries are all just you're just getting the raw truth of the moment? That's not true. You're getting the truth, but a lot of times there's technical glitches or the sound problem or the person can't be understood, and so they do another take. Is that cheating? Well, a lot of years ago, people thought that was cheating. Um, Earl Morris is a filmmaker. The Fog of War is one of his most famous, and he does a lot of reenactments. The Thin Blue Line was a film that he made to put him on the map about uh, a guy supposedly on death row for murdering a cop. Well, they reenacted some scenes with some actors. People thought it was cheating. Well, that was his way of doing it. Is it any less truthful? No. He just didn't have the visuals. He wanted to make it more visual. Instead of having talking heads telling the story, he wanted to tell it visually. And so he would reenact these scenes with other people portraying the real people. Now, the interesting thing about that movie, this is the power of documentaries, the power of cinema, is throughout the movie, it looks like the guy who they had on death row looks like the wrong guy. And at the end of the movie, he was the wrong guy. They found the right guy and they released the wrong guy out of prison. That's the power of cinema and documentaries. They had the wrong guy in jail, rotting away on death row. Another example of that was um, the kids that were accused of murder. And I got to think of the name of the movie. I'm drawing a blank right now. Hold on. I'll come up with it. Anyway, they were accused of murder, of literally sadistic, satanic murder, supposedly, because these kids were outcasts in the community. It was the Memphis Three, is in Memphis, Tennessee, um, and they were listening to heavy metal music. And the prosecutor said the music was telling them to murder these kids. Um, at the time. And one of the kids who was his intellectual capacity is very low, uh, down in the 70s and 80s on the IQ, and he confessed to the murder. They didn't do it. They went to prison. One of them was given death. Damien was the head guy. He was this kind of handsome, gothic rock and roll type of dude. Um, well, over the years, rock stars like Eddie Vedder from Pearl Jam and lots of other people felt he had been railroaded and was not guilty. And if you watch the film, you can see that the prosecutor just hated these kids because they had long hair and they practiced gothic music. They listened to heavy metal music. Judas Priest was the band that was on trial. In the movie, if you watch it, it they constantly interview this other dude who was the father-in-law or the stepfather of these kids. Well, it almost seems pretty obvious that he might be the guilty one. Anyway, after the movie came out, played in the movie theaters, they did a part two where they actually released them. The guy they thought that was in the movie that was sort of intimating that he might have done it, did it. And they released these kids out of, they were kids and just in their 20s, at a maximum state prison. He was released off death row. He's there for 18 years, folks, or it might have been longer. He's out now. He's written books, about his experience on death row for a crime he didn't commit. So the power of documentaries cannot be underestimated. Nanook in North was one of the first documentaries ever made. A silent film made in the 20s, supposedly up in Antarctic with real Eskimos. Well, it looks like their day to day life. Well, they didn't know at the time, but they staged a lot of the scenes. That was revealed later that by the time they filmed that movie, things were getting pretty modern up there with the Eskimos, and they weren't as primitive as they're showing them in this movie. They are actually living in houses, not in teepees, out on the ice floes. They're actually eating other food besides the walruses seals that they hunted in the movie. That's what they show them doing. But we believed it. We never seen life like that before. Realized later that a lot of it was staged. So, but is it any less truthful? That's the point. When people think of documentaries, you think you're getting the truth. Not necessarily. You're getting a version of the truth. Is that good enough? If you wanted raw truth, you'd stick a camera on a tree for a year and put it on play, record, and come back. And whatever the camera picks up, that's going to be your movie. But it's going to be an awful boring movie, probably. Another great example, Werner Herzog did this movie, powerful movie called Grizzly Man. I'll show you some film clips of it on modules in the next day or two. I'll post them. Um, this guy, Timothy, went out every year for like 12 years and he recorded the grizzly bears feeding migrations in Alaska. He did this every year. And then he's out there by himself shooting them on a video camera. Then he would edit the works and he would go to schools and lecture. Got so popular that he was even on David Letterman's show once, Jay Leno. He became rather popular. He was good looking blonde, surfer looking dude, and he was making a living off this. But he became too obsessed with it. And he would go back to the same feeding grounds every year where these grizzlies come down, 40 or 50 of them. And he started naming them like they're his pets. And he's out there by himself where it's really, really, really dangerous. He had to be flown in. It was that isolated. You couldn't get there any other way. Well, he decides he has a new girlfriend. He's all excited about showing her his life, and he talks her into going out there with him. She's not that thrilled with that, but they go out there. And guess what happens, folks? A grizzly bear comes in and kills both of them. That's right. It was a grizzly bear that he didn't know, supposedly. It was a bear from outside the usual bear population. The bear was actually called Scar because of all the many wounds it had on it over the years. It was an old skinny bear and it was hungry. And the only reason why he was never attacked before because they were well fed. A bear who's fat and well fed probably, unless you attack their babies, won't attack you. And these grizzlies in this movie are 1,200 pounds and they can run 40 miles an hour, folks. You cannot run a grizzly. You can't go up a tree fast enough. They could climb up a tree in two big leaps and bounds. They say the best thing to do is roll over and play dead and cover your head because the first thing they want to do is rip your head off. That's how they kill you. Um, I'm laughing because that's how they do it. Um, well, Timothy turned the camera on when the bears started attacking them in the campground. He didn't carry any weapons, um, but he didn't take the lens cap off. And so all you hear is the audio. And he's fighting this bear, get this, folks, with a frying pan and further pissing this bear off. And he tells his girlfriend to run for her life. She's screaming and she runs for her life. And within minutes, Timothy's head is ripped off. He's dead. Guess what? She's running through the woods and the bear goes after her and gets her also. Now, days go by. They don't know where he is. The rangers come in to check on his well being. They find the headless bodies of these two people, and lots of their bodies have been eaten by other bears. They see the writing on the wall, and the rangers don't know who's responsible for the killings, and so they kill every bear around. They killed about 6 bears. These were the bears that Timothy was trying to protect, and he got them killed. And that's all in the documentary, Grizzly Man. I'll post a scene from it. Werner Herzog is a German filmmaker who mostly did fiction, scripted films. But when he doesn't get a script or the budget, he goes out and does. He's done dozens of these documentaries, usually around nature, extreme nature. He actually descended into a live volcano. He has swim in the Arctic Circle in the ocean underwater, where he can only live literally for 3 or 4 minutes at a time before you die, no matter how thick your wetsuit is. He goes to these extreme places to push himself. He's still around. He just wrote his autobiography. He's 86. He's still planning his next venture. He likes to push the physical limits of his, not just his body, but his film crew and of nature. And that's how powerful documentaries. I'm going to post a couple. You can look at them on modules. Enjoy the trip on documentaries. Enjoy Grey Gardens. I'll talk to you next week when the story film continues.